And that was not there so much in the UK. I think the UK has had a lot more disruptive experiences with technology and gone through this public, national exegesis about it. And so I think the ecology is very different, social ecology of those is very different in the two places. But I guess I would say I think the cultural domain in which we are inevitably framing this, which is technology, I think is driving certain things about the imaginaries that are being deployed in that context. That would be my sense. We actually start these deliberations we don't tell them it's about nanotechnology when we screen, and we don't screen, we have the survey center screen, or we have an independent third-party screen, and we spend the first almost hour not mentioning it, not talking about and we actually are trying to elicit views about these bigger cultural domains. What is the meaning of health? What is the meaning of technology? What is and so there probably are some, but we aren't asking what is the meaning of risk in that context. Again, we would be feeling like that is over determining in a way that that risk we would want to be. We're trying to create a context as much as possible where those things can be emergent, just as you would in an interview, rather than just point blank asking people. And so that would be a classical kind of cognitive elicitation, free listing kind of, but it's done collectively, and it tells you interesting, and technology. When you ask about technology in the health workshops, you get it's clearly a different domain than it is when you ask about technology in the energy context, even though you're not saying energy technologies. It's completely colored by that domain reference. So that I think that is why, and I think so. If that Project Deepen's report, methodologically different in some ways, and I think much more interested in going down those dysphoric paths unhindered in a way that we felt we needed to be more balanced about. So it's partly methodological issues probably constraining this.
I think it's really interesting, the Anglophonic, the industrialized world, it seems to be some kind of set categorizings done. Yeah. And then also there seems to be a categorization from the academic end, which is nanotechnologies applications that relate to energy and health, versus the public perception. I mean, coming from a consumer of culture, public culture, there's this associations with nanotechnology and robotics, which seems like completely very far in the future, but elicit or evoke different kinds of affect. I think robotics suggest something with no agency, or something you can control, or something that you can turn on and off, as opposed to toxins or viruses or radiation, which is ambient and outside human control. Something about that man-made, the synthetic man-made material versus a tool, So that categorization was very interesting throughout for me.
Yeah. So let me just allude to that last first, which is the categorization. I mean, you could see so in survey we play with categories a lot. We can't. It's not completely open-ended because methodologically you would need a really huge sample and it gets really exorbitantly expensive. But yes, you could. I mean, I've been really interested in the smart technology idea mapped into Nano as well, because I actually think smart technologies will evoke a pretty negative response. That the idea of a technology that has autonomy and smartness in itself is probably not a very effective technology, and yet, yeah, but it's the kind of thing where science and industry's understanding of how to make a seductive technology might be quite different from public's concerns if it's mapped onto something like emerging nano. And yes, we can play with that, the categories. So we picked health and energy because we wanted to systematically compare, and we tried to pick ones where we did expect a lot of divergence, and we found more than we anticipated, actually. The earlier part, yeah, I didn't, it's just how much you can explain in terms of background, but so this risk perception work fits within what's called the social amplification of risk framework, and so the idea is that public perceptions of risk amplify in response to signal amplification about risk that happens, and most often that happens from the media, and most often that, although NGOs are being theorized as actors in that. Sometimes, it also can happen from government. So just saying something needs to be regulated is a good way to increase risk perception, because people assume if it needs to be regulated that it's dangerous. And so some of it could come like from NGOs to influence policymakers, and then it could come back at the public from that direction. But anything that creates a big increase in signaling about risk could serve as a risk event in terms, sociologically. And so most often that has been that's been various technological disasters in the past. So 3 Mile Island is a good example where there was a huge amount of signal amplification around the risk of nuclear power plants, and with the result in stigmatization of the technology that still exists today.
Yeah.
So, and it was actually, and the scientists would say, well, it was, it was a tiny event, it was a very limited area, hardly, it was not like there were thousands of deaths from it. And yet you get amplification. 9/11, there was one of the effects of 9/11 from a risk perception standpoint is that people stopped flying, and in the Eastern Corridor created huge numbers of problems because people didn't want to fly. And so you get, in that model of amplification, you get amplification when there's some reason that signaling is going on that can transmit and create ripple effects far beyond wherever the locus is. So it could be anything. In the nano, there's been a lot of speculation in the nano case about the early speculations were, in fact, people like the head of the National Nanotech Initiative would have meetings to talk about this, and they were speculating what would be the news story that would become the big risk event for amplification. And so the things I heard early on, there was a lot of thought that documentation about breaching of the blood-brain barrier would be one. There's almost certainly, I think we're past that with nano, because clearly nanomaterials can travel anywhere. Yeah, and so, and then there have been other events, like there was in China, there was an paint factory problem so there have been some events that then are argued that they're not really nano. There was one in Germany that had the looks of a nano risk event, but then they decided it was just an aerosolization, and it wasn't nanomaterials, but it was a product that had nano in the title. But again, that has to do with how the message is being controlled and reshaped. But the interesting thing about the Chinese paint factory, there were deaths there, and that did absolutely involve unsafe handling of nanomaterials. Not one single news that was broadcast internationally by Reuters, not one single news entity in the U.S. picked up that story. Tell me why.